Next on MLR Weekly, Major League Rugby Commissioner Nic Benson, John Fitzpatrick of Rugby Morning with headlines and rumors, Bryan of America's Rugby News with concerns about the MLR Draft and what a certain team needs to do in the offseason. Rugby Wrap-Up's MLR Weekly brought to you by Sheehy Auto Stores. It's easy at Sheehy. The Pig and Whistle, New York City, the world's best rugby pub. And Lean and Limber, stretching your way to a healthier lifestyle. To MLR Weekly, as presented by Rugby Wrap-Up. Matt McCarthy in New York City. Thank you for tuning in once again. And just a quick note, although we do this show year-round, we do take a break every so often to try to collect the few marbles that we have left spilled out on the floor. And we will take the next 2 weeks off, but we will come back on fire. We promise you that. In the meantime, today's show is going to be a good one. We have the Commissioner/CEO of Major League Rugby, Mr. Nic Benson. We have Bryan of America's Rugby News weighing in on the draft and what Old Glory needs to do in the offseason. But before we get to any of that, we have our recurring segment, Rugby Morning's Coffee Break with John Fitzpatrick. John, hello. How are you? What do you got for us?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing well. The MLR Hot Stove League is heating up. We're stealing that from Major League Baseball because the Toronto Arrows have traded the number 2 overall pick in the 2023 MLR Collegiate Draft to the Houston SaberCats for fly half Robbie Povey. Robbie Povey is a Canadian international. He's got 13 caps with Canada. But, Matt, you got to think Toronto is making these moves with input from a new head coach, right? They did get rid of Peter Smith just last week. There's got to be a new head coach in the clubhouse, right?
I would imagine that they're making these moves with the input of the head coach, whomever he or she may be at this juncture. We don't know who it is, but yeah, they need to make moves. They're bringing Povey back to home.
But Matt, before we move on, Houston now has the number 2 overall pick. They have the number 9 overall pick. You got to think they're making these moves because they value someone really highly in the draft, right?
And maybe they're not done wheeling and dealing. Maybe they're going to move that 2 and 9 to Miami for the number 1. Although I don't know that executives in the league value these draft choices that highly. Maybe they're going to trade them for a domestic player that's of value. Who knows? They're in a good position, though. Next!
Well, let's talk about the draft real quick because the Miami Sharks, they do have the number 1 overall pick. They're building a new roster. Player expansion draft details haven't been released yet. Do you think Miami will trade that number 1 overall pick to another MLR club?
They may, but again, my talks with the GMs in the bars and the pubs across America, the draft choices aren't those impact players as of yet. So Miami would be lucky to get maybe a domestic player back that starts for that number 1 pick from a team that might not necessarily need it. So more intrigue. Next!
Hey, Matt, Major League Rugby announced that New England fly half Jason Patros is the 2023 Player of the Year. How about New England striking gold twice, back-to-back selections for Player of the Year? Of course, Bodine Waka won it in 2022. Now, Waka, it did re-sign through the end of the 2025 season. So, Matt, I got to ask, do you think Jason Patros will come back to New England?
All right, a couple of 3 things here. First off, I called Jason Patros the Player of the Year on the live pregame show before the MLR Shield match in Chicago. That's number 1. So let's get the back patting out of the way. Thank you. Number 2, Patros, when I spoke to him, he didn't necessarily make it a definitive that he was coming back here next year, although he would like to. He didn't really say he was sure about that yet. And Waka, although he's signed, I haven't seen the contract, but a lot of the wording in these contracts, which is a problem for the players when they were complaining about it with the Players Association thing, is that, they're pretty loosely worded and they can end or terminate the contract. they won the championship without Walker. They don't need him necessarily. Wait and see. Next.
Wouldn't that be something else? The New England retooling for next year without Waka. But Matt, this is just the start of the MLR Hot Stove League. I got to imagine we're going to see a number of player trades and draft pick deals before the collegiate draft in August.
Yeah, we'll also see some of that salary cap stuff being bandied back and forth, right?
We shall see. Salary cap considerations is the phrase that they use.
Yeah. All right. What else you got for us, John?
Matt, that said, we are starting to get into the dog days of summer, and I miss MLR already. Come back.
All right. On that note, John's done, but we're not going to do a recap because there was no game last week. But we are going to take a break and then come back with the Commissioner / CEO of Major League Rugby, Mr. Nic Benson, right after this.
Need a great price on a new vehicle? Sheehy makes it easy. Easy Price shows you our lowest prices on the Mid-Atlantic's largest selection. Find your best price online or at any of our 31 dealerships.
It's easy at Sheehy. Sheehy.com.
You need your cleats? You need them tomorrow? If you order today by 3 p.m. New York time or noon LA time, they can have them to you tomorrow. Young, old, male, female, if you're playing on turf, if you're playing on grass, if you're playing in the rain, you're playing in the heat, they've got you covered. RugbyNow.com. Go there now. And we are back, and we have the honor and privilege and pleasure of having Mr. Nic Benson, a.k.a. the CEO / Commissioner of Major League Rugby. Welcome to MLR Weekly.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Matt.
And let's get down to the nitty-gritty. A lot of people don't know who you are, so let's give them a glimpse. All right, if you, on a game show, you had to say your formative years mostly were spent in?
Probably Kenya. So I was an embassy brat, so I grew up all over the world. I picked up rugby in Kenya. I played in England. Finished high school in Panama. So I was an embassy brat.
Favorite NFL team?
Probably the Bucks. I went to Florida State, so they were my hometown, closest to a hometown team that I had. So I was there when they won the Super Bowl in 2002.
Favorite NBA team?
Not a huge basketball follower, but to the extent I have one, it would be the Jazz. It's the only NBA team I've been to a game for.
Astros or Rangers?
Astros.
The Subway Series in New York, Mets or Yankees?
Yankees. My dad was a Yankees fan.
All right, thanks for coming on the program, Mr. Benson. It was great chatting with you. Bye-bye. And the last question in the lightning round, when are you moving to New York City with the HQ?
As soon as you get me a reservation, weekly reservation, and Peter Luger's on you.
Let's talk about the league now. The championship, the MLR Shield match. A, it was great. I was there. And B, are we going to keep it a Shield or are we going to go with a cup?
I'm a big fan of the Shield. There's a long tradition of shields in rugby. The top 14, I forget what it's called, but the top 14 have a shield. You have the huge shield. So I'm a fan of the Shield. Full disclosure, the Shield was also my idea back in 2018. So I'm a little bit partial to it. And I know that it gets a lot of criticism out there, and I'm good with that. I think it's the right call.
Well, I'm probably one of the biggest critics of it because you can't drink out of it. And I'm a big fan of the World Cup, the Webb Ellis World Cup, and the Stanley Cup. You know, where you have those, it's that thing. Well, at least it's not as heavy as it was the first two seasons where it was like you had 15 of the Seattle Seawolves pulling triceps trying to hoist the shield that first year. Remember that one?
I was absolutely terrified that someone was going to drop that shield and it was going to be an end of a lawsuit.
Yeah, it was like
that thing was heavy.
It's like we could build a fortress with these things, right? But all right, at least you can hoist it now, which is fine. And they're figuring out how to travel around with it, so that's good too. But other than that, let's get back to that match. First, neutral site, Super Bowl, if you will, for the league. And quite frankly, it was everything you could have asked for.
Yeah, we were really happy with the event. The big thing for us was we wanted the event to be about more than just rugby and more than just the game on the field. We wanted it to be a celebration. it's going to take some time for that to be fully adopted by all the fans. But between the festivities outside, the show on the field, the actual game on the field, and the pregame and the postgame, I thought we had a really successful event. I've got a laundry list as long as Shaq's arm of like little things that we need to do better. There always are, operationally and logistically, but all in all, it was a success. A ton of credit is deserving of by the Chicago team. They deserve a ton of credit. They took the bull by the horns and they really pushed. They really pushed for that event, and they wanted to have a neutral site final, and they wanted to showcase what they could do in Chicago, what Chicago is as a rugby city. And they did a fantastic job. So we will definitely be building on that next year. Where we'll hold it next year is open. We haven't decided yet. We hope to make an announcement in the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks.
But we had an exclusive here. I thought you were coming with me with an exclusive here, Commish.
Maybe in 4 to 6 weeks.
Right.
We can talk about that once we have that. We're putting it out to the other teams and seeing who wants to put their hands up to host. It's a lot of work, but it's rewarding. I think the Hounds gained a lot of great brand leverage from the experience and market. So we're excited for them, and we're excited for what we're going to do next year. Hopefully, it'll just be bigger, better, and smoother.
A couple of things I wanted to talk about that aren't so fun to talk about. Players unionization. They didn't get the certification that they needed to make the stand that they were looking to potentially make. What's the latest on that? Can you give us any information?
Not a ton that I can say about that, just because of sort of the legal framework. Ultimately, the decision on whether or not to unionize is up to the players. They're going to make that decision. Our concern as the league really is to make sure that there's a process in place that allows all of them to have their voice heard in that decision. That's why you have NLRB elections. Everybody gets an opportunity to educate themselves on what it means, and everybody gets an opportunity to vote on whether they think that's the right decision for them.
The college draft, the MLR draft, a significant drop-off in the number of players declaring. What does that tell us? What does it mean? What do we have to do?
Well, I think that so right now we're at 73 players have declared versus 123 at this time last year. I think a lot of the delta there can be put down to a sort of our process is running a little bit later than it did last year, so we're just a little bit behind in terms of timing. We're pretty confident that number is going to pick up by the time the draft actually takes place. We're also really comfortable that we feel that the best players out there in the collegiate system are declaring. So we're really comfortable with the level of talent that's in there. Remember last year we had 150 players who declared, and only 39 get drafted, right? So I think we're really comfortable with the talent level in there. We're really comfortable with the pipeline.
I've got friends, and this is a good problem because we've got generations now playing rugby, and friends of mine are now having kids that are draft eligible, and they're asking me what they should do in terms of declaring or not declaring. What would you say?
I would say they should declare. There's no harm in declaring for the draft. If you don't get picked, then their kids will be free to go out and join an academy or join a team as part of the follow-up signing process.
Do you talk to other commissioners of the different pro setups across the globe, and do you get unsolicited advice from these folks as well?
I talk to a lot of the sort of global rugby sort of CEOs and leaders, and I think in many ways a lot of the challenges that we face are similar. Rugby's a challenger sport in a lot of markets. We're fighting and we're competing for mind share in the U.S. We're competing with football, baseball, basketball, soccer because we're the most competitive sports market in the world. But even if you look at the Celtic leagues and you look at the UK leagues, they're competing with other fall and winter sports as well. And so I think we share a lot of challenges. Unsolicited advice, fortunately I don't get too much of that from that a particular venue. I get plenty. I don't get any from that particular venue, but those relationships are really important.
Yeah, we were on for 4 hours prior to this call, ladies and gentlemen. I was giving him 4 hours of unsolicited advice.
I got notes. I took notes.
They're right in the garbage.
Our big, hairy, audacious goal is 1 million kids playing rugby by 2031.
Yeah.
And we have a pathway. We have a pathway to get there and to get into 50,000 schools that we've worked on over the past year or so. Really been driven by Guy Hagan, our youth development officer, who's incredibly knowledgeable and on that space. So that's the pathway, right? That's the pathway to growth. At the same time, we have to work from the top down. We have to work on our media product. We have to work on our events. We have to work on capturing new fans who are already, older and maybe are never going to play rugby. If you go to a lot of games, they got some money in their pocket to buy jerseys and come to games. But you go to, if you go to a lot of our games, there's a lot of people in those stands who didn't know anything about rugby in 2018.
Yeah.
Right. The example I use, and this is from my time as with the Utah Warriors, right? Like, you're sitting in those stands, and a lot of those fans are families from the neighborhood, right? They didn't know anything about rugby, but they're like, hey, there's a stadium across the street, and they seem to be having an event, so I'm going to walk over with my kids and see what it is. And they walked in, and they had a great game day experience, and they loved it. So then they enrolled their kids in the Junior Warriors program, and then and you got the same thing happening in Texas, New England, and there's a template for the teams that have done that really, really well, and we're starting to spread that and make sure that we're bringing up those who haven't built out their grassroots programs as well, because they're newer. What's
the relationship with USA Rugby right now? How involved are you guys in helping find the new CEO or stabilizing the head coaching positions for the men's 15s program?
I'm on the phone with USA Rugby Weekly. I think a lot of the things that we're working on are very much shared goals. Imagine Rugby is one of those. We recently announced the formation of a professional game board as a dialogue mechanism between us and USA Rugby, which is going to be incredibly important to make sure that we're uniting our pathways so we're not duplicating effort. And so that the pathways that we're building within MLR sync into the pathways that they're building at USA Rugby, both, through the first pilot was the Hawks program that we ran in Charlotte this year alongside USA Rugby. It was, USA Rugby's program with MLR players. And, the next steps of that are under discussion right now. At the top level, how do you take the best of that talent and make sure that they're building cohesion, game time, and high quality minutes so that they can develop into Eagles, and the Eagles can obviously go from where they are right now to a World Cup.
Well, the bright side of the Eagles
semifinal.
The bright side of the Eagles right now is it's only up that they can go.
So as part of that conversation around the professional game board, we've talked a lot about how we cross over governance structures. And one of the things that we're putting in place is observer seats, across our boards, right? So that we'll have better connectivity, across those issues. As far as MLR owners on the board of USA Rugby, that's a question you probably have to ask USA Rugby directly.
The last thing we have to talk about, of course, is Miami coming into the league.
Having a team in Miami, Miami is such a unique market. As a Florida college kid, I love seeing a team in Florida. I used to live in Miami, so I'm very excited about what they can do there. They're going to have a special. They're going to have a team. Just having been at their grand opening event, that they're going to do it with flair. They're going to do it with panache, and it's going to have its own flavor. So we're incredibly excited about what they're going to build down there.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be a good group that they're putting together down there. Mr. Nic Benson, I want to thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thanks for having me on. Good to see you again.
All right, that was Nic Benson, the Commissioner/CEO of Major League Rugby. We'll be right back with Mr. Bryan Ray of America's Rugby News after this.
If you're in New York City and want to watch some great rugby, have some great food, and some great times, go to the world's best rugby pub, the Pig and Whistle on West 36th Street.
This is the Rugby Odds, where an unlikely pundit panel of a wordsmith, a WWE legend, a rugby star, and a supermodel scour the globe, seeking best bets and bad behavior. Are you not entertained? And we're back with Mr. Bryan Ray of America's Rugby News. There's nobody on this planet that knows more about rugby than Bryan Ray of America's Rugby News, ladies and gentlemen. With that, Bryan, no pressure, but how are you?
Yeah, doing all right. It's been a little bit, wet out in here in Nova Scotia recently, but we're going on.
Bryan, we just heard from Nic Benson, and you and I were talking off camera about the MLR Draft, the upcoming MLR Draft, and you had some concerns. What are they?
So, I mean, people sometimes ask me, who do I think is going to be, the top picks in the draft or whatever, and we kind of take a look at who is actually, put their name in to be drafted, and the numbers of players who have actually submitted, who have declared for the draft, is significantly lower than last year, like a little over a third the number who applied or declared last year. That to me is very concerning. And I think it speaks to the current pay scale at the kind of the starting level of MLR. I think it's way too low. I think the owners have to sit down and actually talk about this. And I think we need to see a significant raise in the salary cap and those, a minimum, whatever the minimum level is. I think it needs to go up significantly because the top players just aren't declaring right now. We're seeing that. We saw it a little bit last year. Some of the guys, certainly the Canadian prospects who I expected to be at the very top of the draft, did not put their names in because the pay, I know for a fact, because they had well-paying jobs that they were preferred to do instead of doing that. And I think we're seeing that trend play out a little bit even more heavy this year. And that to me is very concerning. And I think that's something that MLR needs to discuss. I'm not saying you have to be raking out 50 grand for these guys coming straight out of college, because obviously a lot of them are very raw. They do have some, and keep in mind, not all the guys even get signed, the guys who do get drafted, but there has to be some kind of a minimum level that's not $15 an hour, going to get some job. It's equivalent of getting a regular old whatever job, right? We've heard certainly concerns about that from the Players Association, who are looking to become a real union. Not entirely sure where that stands at the moment, but I kind of have to agree with them. That bottom shelf, I think the owners really have to kind of bite the bullet on this. I know they want to stay. We got to keep this thing so we can keep it going. It has to work that way. It has to be sustainable. However, at some point, you have to invest in that domestic talent. If you want that domestic talent to get better, you've got to get the best of the talent that is available out there in college rugby right now. And it's quite clear to me that that's not happening right now.
Let's change gears a little bit. We were talking last week about needs of, say, Atlanta and the Toronto Arrows. But right now, Bryan, I want you to look at Old Glory DC. What does Old Glory need to do this offseason?
Well, I think they've, already addressed the number one thing. Obviously, they had to find a new head coach after Josh Sims has departed for Italy. They got Simon Cross in, which I think, I think was a great move, specifically because he's a defense specialist. We saw Josh Sims come in and really tighten up. Particularly, they were a good attacking side, but he added just a little bit more, maybe structure to them. They were really firing on the offensive side of things this year. They improved their defense by about 10 points, a little bit more than that, conceded every game, which is significant. That's excellent. But they still weren't that strong defensively. I think they were fourth from the bottom. On the personnel front, I think they need to just strengthen their tight five a little bit more. I think we saw Ramiro Herrera come in, and it was kind of clear that he was maybe a little bit longer in the tooth than we maybe anticipated. Didn't really have much of an impact. So they need to strengthen that a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if Facundo Gattas wasn't returning. I thought he didn't get a lot of playing time this year. And behind that, Koi Nelligan, very inexperienced at hooker. So he's got a little bit more time to develop there. He's kind of making that permanent shift from flanker. So I think there's room for maybe a couple front rowers, certainly a second row. They brought in Kyle Bailey. I would look to sign him very quickly, but Api Nicotini certainly coming up towards the end of his career. Stan South, unfortunately, is retired. So room for another second row. Back row stocks look terrific. I'd like to see Colin Gross, who played mostly at lock this year, concentrate on the back row next year where he's, more inclined to play it. That's where he's been selected as a blindside flanker with the Eagles squad. So that's where I'd like to see him concentrating on. Do you think Corey Daniel will come back from injury? Lotardo Bavaro, outstanding. The Gemma Fatanana Schultz, outstanding. They had brought in Langi Hapiaki. They brought in Vincent Coleman in there, but then they brought in Nico Jones, who is absolutely outstanding. Whether they're going to retain him, I'm not sure, but obviously they'd love to do that. So I think they're pretty good in the back row. But I think that tight five could use a little bit of strengthening. In the backs, I think they could use maybe, they look pretty good. I think they could use maybe a big body. You can see Threaten Palamo again, getting up there, 35 years old, about there. So he's not going to last forever, whether he even comes back next season or not entirely sure. So I think they could use another big body who can punch holes maybe in the midfield or out wide. And then, out wide, I think it's just a matter of getting guys healthy again. Owen Sheehy, hopefully he'll come back. And Mike DeBoulis, a big one. He missed a lot of the season, unfortunately. So I think they're actually in pretty good shape. For the most part, it's more about tightening up, I think, a little bit more than it doesn't need a major overhaul. I think 4 or 5 good, strong signings could go a long way for them.
Yeah, that's the thing. So I've got people contacting me from overseas asking me, oh, so-and-so wants to play. He's played in the Premiership. He's played in the URC, yada, yada, yada. And he's just past his 30th birthday. And the response, the cold hard truth is, well, that would be an international slot and expensive and a visa and all that jazz for players that, if it was on face value, but that's not the case for a lot of people. And a lot of folks don't understand that yet. And then when you hit them and they're like, oh, okay. Yeah. Because it's different than overseas in professional rugby than it is here. Yeah, it is. And I think if you can just take the Free Jacks, for example, and you look at their recruitment, people kind of made fun of MLR as being kind of a retirement, victory lap kind of thing. And certainly at the beginning, some of the older players that came in and, they might point to Ma'ananu, but he was actually in tremendous shape for his age. But I think if you look at how the Free Jacks have recruited, a lot of their guys, they're not these retirement guys who are over pushing 30. They're more like, late 20s established guys who are just kind of missing out on Super Rugby contracts, guys who could very easily probably go sign, contracts in Europe, or certainly of that standard, or very close to it. So I think that's kind of the trend more that MLR is pushing now is not necessarily these name guys, because let's be frank, nobody in the United States knows who these guys are anyway. So it's more about getting the caliber of the players. Another thing about DC, Old Glory DC, is they are looking to get a different venue. They could do better than Segra, and I think they understand that. But Segra did serve its purpose. Yeah, I would just agree that Segra maybe isn't the best place we've seen. And it's unfortunate, right at the end of the season, we saw quite good crowds coming in. In the preseason, they were sold out. It looked really promising. But in between there during the season, long stretches were not a great turnout. So, maybe they look to that Maryland soccer complex or some other venue. But I think you're right. That's probably another spot that Old Glory can look to do. On that note, I want to thank you, Mr. Bryan Ray of America's Rugby News, for coming on. I want to thank John Fitzpatrick of Rugby Morning. I want to thank the Commissioner/CEO, Mr. Nic Benson of Major League Rugby, and thank you for tuning in. Please check out our other shows, including the critically acclaimed The Rugby Odds, the College Rugby Wrap-Up. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Please join our weekly newsletter, and please sign up for our American Red Cross Blood Donor Team.